Hi, I want to welcome you to this presentation on mental wellness in the perinatal period, embracing the transition from pregnancy to postpartum. My name is Allison Greenoff, and I'm a registered social worker with over 19 years experience. Many different areas. I've worked child protection, the community support program, long-term care, rehabilitation, mental health and addictions program, and most recently in the medicine program. Right now, I'm a MSW student, so I'm doing my master's in social work through Wilfrid Laurier University, and I'm on a field placement where my supervisor is Jackie Butt, and that's in the provincial groups program in mental health and addictions with Newfoundland Health Services. In recent years, I've developed a keen interest in perinatal mental health, and in speaking with Jackie, she informed me that this is an area that she was hoping to research and develop a treatment group for. So, of course, I was super excited to hear that, and that's been a major part of my role since starting this placement. So, I've been doing the research, and I developed this presentation, which was originally for Wellness Wednesday, and will be used as part of a future treatment group for perinatal mental health. So I'm really excited to be offering this, and I hope that everybody, is able to gain a lot from this presentation. So I've been completing my placement remotely, and I'm located in St. John's. But this is a provincial program, so it's connecting people right across the island and in Labrador as well. So before we get started, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So St. John's is home to a rich, diverse, and vibrant urban Indigenous community. It's located on the ancestral unceded territory of the Beothuk. The lands and waters in and around the city have traditionally served as a gathering place for the Mi'kmaq. The broader region of Newfoundland and Labrador is home to diverse Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We honor and pay respect to the past, present, and future caretakers of these territories. Okay, there on your screen, you'll see the outline for the presentation today. We'll be starting with a little reflection called Who Am I Now That? And then that's going to go into a conversation about matrescence, which essentially matrescence is the process of becoming a mother. After we discuss that concept, we're going to get into looking at the developmental domains, which really are the factors in life that can influence our experience of motherhood. There's going to be aspects like neurological aspects, psychological, biological, economic, social. These are all factors in life that can influence one's experience, like in motherhood, okay? And really contribute to the transformation that takes place. What we will learn is that matrescence is a transformative time. So the person that you were before pregnancy is totally different than the person after postpartum, after the perinatal period. You're a whole new person. Your identity shifts and changes. You evolve into somebody new. And it's through these developmental domains, these factors in life that really propel that change and influence that change. We're also going to be learning towards the end of the presentation more about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. It's important for the public to have information about this, to really know about the signs and symptoms and what to look for, and how to access support if needed. Okay, so what you'll see now on your screen is in the circles are all the different domains, okay, that we're going to be talking about and looking at motherhood through these lenses. So as you can see, there's many there. We're going to be talking about like biological, neurological, economic, spiritual, cultural, psychological, existential, social, ecological. So lots of um, different lenses that we're going to be talking about. When I first started this placement with the Provincial Groups program, I decided to reach out to my friend Emma Duke, and maybe you know her. She's a wonderful, fantastic clinical social worker, and she is really experienced in perinatal mental health. So I asked her to meet me for coffee. I wanted to pick her brain because I knew that she had knowledge and experience in this area, and I was trying to figure out where to start the research. And it was actually Emma. Emma was the first person who taught me the word matrescence. And what you have to realize is I'm a mom of two. So my kids are, ages 7 and 4 now. And this was the first time I was hearing this word matrescence. Up until this moment, it wasn't something I had ever heard of. And so she said to me, think of it like adolescence, that transformative time from, going from childhood to adulthood. You're going from child, teenager, adult, and all the transformation that happens in all aspects of your life. But if we look at that concept of adolescence in a similar way to motherhood, wow. Yeah, it's this transformative time. It's this transformative process where one is never, ever the same after. My mind was blown. I just thought about this concept over and over again. I couldn't get it out of my brain. I was like, this is incredible. And how different my experience might have been as a new mom if I had known about matrescence and all the ways that I was going to change as a person and all the different factors that were going to impact my life. And it's very different than the messaging that we get, hey, like that society talks about, because, we're all about bouncing back to our pre-pregnancy bodies and getting back to all the activities and things that we did before becoming parents. So it's interesting to think about matrescence and this pressure that mothers are feeling to get back to who we once were. Okay, I'd like to get started now by inviting you to grab a pen and a piece of paper to engage in this reflection called Who Am I Now That? Okay, and I first came across this reflection while listening to a podcast. I love listening to mommy podcasts. I often do it when I'm getting ready in the morning or going for a drive or a walk. I love listening to podcasts. And on this one particular episode, I heard from Jessie Harold, who is a doula, a coach, and an author of a book called Mother Shift. Okay, and that came out in 2024. It's an excellent book. I loved it. And it really talks about matrescence as this transformative process and journey that mothers go through. Okay, and Jessie is really on a mission to provide information and education to the public, support and guidance around matrescence, okay? To really educate families about how transformative it is and really this massive identity shift that happens, okay? And the more that we can prepare families for this, the more that we can educate people on this, the more preventative it can be for, further mental health issues, and struggles that come throughout the perinatal period. If you knew this information ahead of time going into motherhood, if you were aware that there was going to be these big shifts happening, then that can help, you know, guard you or safeguard in some ways against the shock of the changes, I guess, right? Because you're preparing yourself. You're aware that there's going to be some major changes and shifts happening. So you're not caught off guard as much. Okay? So what this reflection does really is asks us to think about at this point in our lives, wherever you are, who am I now that ... And so people are at all different points in their lives, okay? You could use this for any kind of transition in life. So there's people who right now are going through retirement. They're on the verge of their retirement and they're cluing up, and now they're transitioning into this whole new chapter of their life. So for you, for that person, it would be, who am I now that I'm going to be retired or that I'm retiring? Right? That's huge. For some, it's like, who am I now that I'm getting a divorce? You know, another big shift in that. And what does that mean when you reflect on your sense of self and in all the different domains of your life, how it's going to shift as you're getting divorced, okay? But if we were to solely look at motherhood, and that's what I'm inviting us to do here, who am I now that in the context of motherhood? I think that could be really impactful. And that's really what Jesse Harold was suggesting that we do, you know, and again, somebody's motherhood journey, you know, it varies among all of us. So for one person, perhaps you were a person that said they were never going to have children. It's not in your cards. It's not something that you've been drawn to do or really had a huge desire to do. You imagined yourself with a partner and, you know, a solid career and traveling, and perhaps you and your partner at this particular point in life have started to have these thoughts creep in about motherhood. Gosh, is this something that I want? Is this possible for me? Is this possible for us as a couple? And how would our life change if we decide to start trying to have a child? Right? So who am I now that I'm contemplating motherhood? This is not something that I ever planned or thought for myself. And something has shifted. And now me and my partner are considering this. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? Okay. So with your pen and paper, if that's a scenario you can relate to, you reflect on all of those thoughts and feelings that are just popping up in your mind. What's kind of coming to mind in your body? What are you noticing? Is your heart racing? Are you getting excited when you think about it, or nervous or scared? Like what is happening inside you, and what kind of thoughts are popping up? And then you jot those down. Okay? For other people, it could be, who am I now that I have been trying and trying to have a baby, and my partner and I have not been successful. You know, we have not been able to get pregnant. We've been trying for numerous years now, and we're at a point where we're feeling discouraged or sad or frustrated. Very much still want to be a parent, a mother figure, or a parental figure for some child, okay? And you're feeling like you're at this crossroads where you're considering consulting with fertility services. And you never imagined yourself to be in this position. So who am I now that I'm considering, asking for help, consulting with fertility, and considering next steps? Okay? Which can be scary, and it's a very common thing. It's something that not a lot of women or people like talking about or feel shame about or scared to open up about, because there's a lot of layers there. So if this is you, if this is kind of the situation that you found yourself in, I invite you to reflect on the thoughts and feelings that are coming up for you. Who am I now that? ... Okay? What are you noticing in your body that comes up when you think about the possibility of a referral to fertility services? Or perhaps you're someone in the thick of it and you've been going through fertility now, and there's lots on your mind, lots of thoughts and feelings coming up, and you reflect on those. Okay? For other people, it might be, who am I now that I'm having a child in my 40s or 50s? I was somebody that had my first at age 35 and my second at age 38. So I have little ones in my early 40s. Okay. So for me, who am I now that I'm considered a geriatric mom, or, it was a geriatric pregnancy when I was in my late 30s. That's what they call it, which it seems silly to me, but anyway, that's what it was called. So, who am I now that I'm older? I had children later in life. And what does that mean about my sense of self, my identity, my thoughts and feelings about that, how I'm showing up in the world, what kind of sensations am I getting in my body when I think about this, right? There's all these different changes happening and thoughts and feelings that come along with that. Perhaps you're a single person who always wanted to have children and just never found the right person, but you're at a point in your life where you have a great career, you have good family support or a friend group around you, and you've made the decision to adopt. So who am I now that I am considering adopting as a single person? And what will that mean for my identity and sense of self and my life? How will that change? So this is really just meant to get you thinking about how motherhood is this transformative experience. It impacts all areas of life and your identity. And it's just important to recognize and name where you are right now in this moment, where you are on your journey, and what kind of thoughts are showing up for you. The more that we can recognize those thoughts and name them, the more that we can make peace with them and address them. Okay? So that's kind of the point of this reflection now. So the good thing is considering this is a webinar, you can press pause and certainly come back to this after you've done your little reflection, or maybe you're just doing it mentally, and you're going to continue on with the webinar as is now. But whatever you choose to do, please know that if there's certain thoughts and feelings that get triggered and you're needing extra support in navigating those, at the end of this presentation there will be a list of resources there, so please reach out if you need the extra support, and then I will look forward to seeing you on the next slide as we continue with this webinar. Thanks. Okay, so now that you've had time to reflect on who am I now that, we're going to be talking more about matrescence and the developmental domains of life. Okay, so as I mentioned before, matrescence is the process of becoming a mother. That's what it means. And it was a concept that was developed back in the 1970s by an anthropologist named Dana Raphael. And I do hope that I am pronouncing these names correctly, but if I'm not, I do apologize. So Dana Raphael came up with the concept, but then there was probably a pause in the research. There wasn't much out there on matrescence for another 30 or 40 years until psychologist Aurelie Athen came along. And Athen was really the person that started to look more in depth at the developmental domains and how they impact motherhood, right? And that's really what we're going to be going through next. So Athen wanted to raise the awareness and advocate for matrescence to be viewed as a perinatal care framework for early intervention and prevention. Okay. And I just want to make sure everyone understands what the word perinatal means. So perinatal represents the time from conception to about 1 year postpartum. Okay, that's what that means. That's what the time represents. So I just kind of want to take a moment to reflect more on the messages that we receive as women or mothers in society, okay? And how impactful they can be. So for instance, you may have heard people say, Sally never wants to go out anymore. She's like a totally different person now that she's had a baby. She was always so much fun. She was always the life of the party. And now she barely leaves her house. Okay. Or somebody might say, oh, have you seen Lori lately? She's really let herself go since having the baby. I'm really worried about her. Or maybe you've heard people make comments like, oh no, Alex is at the lunchroom again. All they ever talk about is their baby poop and feeding schedules. I'm so sick of talking about baby stuff at the lunchroom. Okay. So the society's messages about mothers is really harmful and hurtful and damaging. There's really this pressure to bounce back. How quickly can a mother bounce back and go back to the person that she was before having a baby? How quickly can she shed the pounds and fit into her pre-pregnancy clothes? And how quickly can she get back to going and doing all of the fun things that she used to do? Socializing, going to the gym, Zumba class, pickleball, whatever you're into, right? How quickly can you get back into those routines? And I just think, how unreasonable is that? Thinking back to my friend Emma, who invited me to think about matrescence like adolescence, okay? So if we look at that right now, do we ever ask a young person to go backwards? Do we ever pressure them to revert back to behave and to look more like who they used to be before going through adolescence? Of course not. We are helping our young people navigate puberty. We're in the schools, in the curriculum, teaching kids of what to expect in puberty and what's going to be changing in their bodies and in their minds and relationships. And we're helping supporting them through that transformative time. Okay? And we're not trying to get these young people to fit back into their old clothes. And we're not trying to get them to act like they once would, or to rejoin activities that they once loved. Right? We're helping them move forward in their life and continue to grow. So why is it different for moms? Why is it different for matrescents? And I think it comes down to that society messaging around women and mothers, right? And so through this education, through people like Jessie Harold and Orly Athen, and Emma Duke, who's out there educating us on matrescence, I hope that with more and more education, those messaging towards mothers and women will start to change, and perhaps more supports can be put in place to help support the mother through this transformative process and become the person that she's meant to be or wants to be, right? The person who she's growing into in this process. That's the goal, okay? So to quote Jessie Harold, she said, "Any transformation in our lives asks us to step into a new identity, a new way of being in the world, and therefore asks us to let go of who we are no longer." So I really think if you're along this motherhood journey and you've been trying so hard to get back into your pre-pregnancy clothes, or to get back to socializing and going out with all your friends and doing all that, you don't have to, okay? You can continue to grow and evolve as you're meant to into a whole new person, because your life is never going to be the same. So many parts of you have changed in this process of becoming a mother, okay? And that's a good thing. Change is good. You're evolving into someone new. And, we could even reflect on this later in life with menopause too, right? That's another huge life transition that's ahead, where your body and your mind and your brain and relationships and your work, menopause is another transformative time. So there's periods in our lives that propel us forward to change and to grow. And that's okay. That's a part of life. And that's really the message that I hope that you receive today, is that you don't need to go backwards. You can keep evolving and moving forward. Okay? On to the next slide. I just wanted to go over one of Athen's quotes here that I came across in the research, and it says, "What has been evidenced to date is that people who experience preconception, pregnancy, birth, surrogacy, adoption, and early parenting undergo alterations not only in a few domains, like Raphael initially proposed, but across all domains of human existence." That's how impactful this is and how transformative this period of life is for mothers. I wanted to take a moment to revisit this slide where it shows all of the different domains. And I wanted to make the point that no two domains work in isolation. Okay, they can intersect and they impact one another. So as we go through each domain, I encourage you to reflect on how they may influence you in terms of where you are in your motherhood journey. Think about these factors, look at the slides and all the points that are on them, and maybe have a pen and a piece of paper in front of you. Take a few notes to kind of start to make the connections on these different domains and how they relate to your life. Some of you may choose to do this mentally, and that's totally fine. But for others, you might find it more helpful to jot down a few notes and really acknowledge how this relates to your own personal experience with motherhood. Let's start with biological. Okay, let's start exploring the biological factors that can influence our experience as mothers. And the first thing that comes to mind is fluctuating hormones. Okay? Think about all the changes and the fluctuations that happen pre-conception, so before we conceive, before we get pregnant, our hormones are a certain way. And then they shift and change, go up and down throughout pregnancy. And then after, there's a lot of ups and downs as well with those hormones. And so many things can influence our hormones as well, right? How much sleep we get, the foods that we're eating, our stress levels, any kind of underlying medical conditions that we might have. All of these different things can impact our hormones, and our hormones can impact these other factors. Like hormones can influence our ability to sleep. For some, it makes us wiped out and we just need more and more and more sleep. That's what it feels like. It's like we can't get enough. And then there's a shift. And for some other women, or at different points in the pregnancy journey, you might not be able to sleep. You might experience insomnia. So they influence each other. Okay? But hormones is a huge thing. Biology makes me think of the things that somebody might be predispositioned for as well, that's been passed down in our families. Some of that could be things like pre-existing medical conditions. Perhaps, there are certain factors in your family that have been passed down, right? Say if somebody has polycystic ovarian syndrome and your mom had it and your grandmother had it, you're more predispositioned to get it as well. And having something like polycystic ovarian syndrome can influence our fertility, our experience in pregnancy, the fluctuating hormones, our skin, our hair, our pain, right? Because if you have any kind of cysts or fibroids happening, that can be very painful. So biology makes me think about those kinds of things, the things that we're predispositioned for, any kind of underlying medical conditions we might have or inherit, the shape of our bodies is going to be different from person to person. How much your body changes in shape and size from before pregnancy, during pregnancy, postpartum, and all throughout the perinatal period. It's going to change. And I also think about like how, you know, a mother's ability to breastfeed or feeling comfortable or successful in breastfeeding. There's many biological factors that can influence a mother's experience with that. So when you think about it, like there's different shape nipples, how much milk a woman is able to produce or is producing, the strength of the letdown, right? And also baby's biology. So whether or not baby has a tongue tie, okay? And that can impact baby's ability to latch or have a strong latch to mom's nipple to get the milk. These things are biological factors. I also just kind of wanted to make a little note here about the feeling of touched out. And this is a common experience in motherhood that many people feel so much guilt and shame about. You know, because we spend so much time nurturing that baby, the baby's living in our body, growing in our body, okay? Our body is no longer our own. You are sharing the space with another being, okay? And then the baby comes out, and for many women, they will be the primary caregiver. Some will be breastfeeding, others will be bottle feeding, but either way, there's a lot of time that baby is up in your arms, falling asleep on you, you're rocking the baby, you're bouncing the baby, you're loving that baby. That baby is on you. And then at the end of the day, when you finally lay that baby down, or when your partner spouse comes and takes the baby, or if your support system comes along and takes that baby for a little bit, many women don't want to be touched. It's like if somebody were to brush up against their skin, it just feels awful. It's almost like cringeworthy. That's that feeling of touched out. So the really difficult part of that is that there's psychological effects that can come with that, those feelings of guilt and shame. So for instance, if you have 2 children and you've just spent the entire day caregiving your brand new baby, taking care of that little one, and then your oldest child comes home from daycare and wants to be all over you and snuggle, but then you're feeling that cringe inside. You don't want to be touched. You just want some space. You just need a break. And that can feel terrible because you miss and love that other child, right? They're your baby too. It doesn't make you a bad mom or a bad parent. You're human. And that feeling touched out is a common experience in motherhood because you're spending so much time with having another being on your body touching you at all times that you become overstimulated. And of course, this is going to impact mothers differently. Some, it might not be a thing. It might not be something that's a big deal. For others, they will feel that discomfort, and that can bring about feelings. It can impact relationships because it could also influence your connection with your spouse. So your spouse is missing you and, looking for touch. And if you've just spent the day caregiving, you just might be like, nope, please don't touch me. I just need to be by myself. And so there can be that real disconnect that starts to happen. And these are the things that are not often talked about. And people, suffer in silence thinking like that they're terrible for not wanting to be with their partner or their spouse, or to not want to cuddle and snuggle their other child at the end of the day, right? It can feel pretty awful. It doesn't mean you're an awful person. It does not mean that you're a bad mom. It has to do with that feeling of overstimulation. And if you have anything like, if you're neurodivergent, if you're somebody who is more prone to be sensitive to stimulation, that can even be like even more impactful. Okay. Because you're somebody who already is sensitive to being overstimulated. So these are things that I want you to consider, that I would like you to reflect on. If you're, no matter what stage of motherhood you're in, or if you're somebody supporting somebody who's on a motherhood journey, you can also reflect on this. Maybe you're the spouse who feels that disconnect from your partner and is like, oh my gosh, it's like they don't want me anymore. It's like they don't love me anymore. It's like they don't see me anymore. And is it always going to be like this? If you have this knowledge and understanding that this is a common thing that happens, that will help you. It'll open up the doors for a potential conversation. You can start recognizing it and naming it. Oh, I'm feeling really touched out today. And I know this is really hard right now. And I miss you, but I can't have you touching me right now. And maybe we can make a plan to get some help in a couple of weeks. Or Nanny and Poppy, or we can get a sitter who can look after baby for a bit and give us some time to connect. Or maybe there's other ways we can connect right now. Okay, but the key is to let go of that shame or let go of those guilty feelings and understand that this is a normal thing that happens. It's not your fault. It doesn't make you a bad person. And that talking about it with your loved ones can help strengthen or maintain solid connections, and to be able to get the support that you need to get through this particular stage that you're in. I want to take a few minutes to introduce you to a coping strategy called dropping anchor. I learned about dropping anchor in a training by Russ Harris, and this was in acceptance and commitment therapy. And dropping anchor is a diffusion technique, okay? And how we do that is by acknowledging our thoughts and feelings. So we're going to notice and name them. We're going to connect with our body. And we're going to engage fully in whatever we're doing in the moment or wherever we are in our environment. You can remember the 3 steps by thinking of ACE. acknowledge, connect, and engage. What I like to think of with this, and Russ invites us to think about this, is imagine yourself in a boat in the harbor and the storm is coming. You look up overhead, you notice the dark clouds, the wind is picking up, the waves are getting higher and higher. And so what are we going to do? We're out in the harbor and we want to make sure we're going to be okay in the storm. So we drop an anchor, and the anchor is going to keep us grounded throughout the storm. And much the same, we can be completely overwhelmed or caught up like a storm in our minds. We can get carried away with our thoughts and our feelings, pulled away from the present moment. And when we start getting caught up with our thoughts and our feelings, that's called fusion. They kind of just come together, they fuse together. We attach meaning and judgment to our thoughts. And often we end up down like a rabbit hole, right? How diffusion works is we're trying to separate judgments from our thoughts and feelings. Okay, and that's called diffusion. So we're breaking them apart. We're not going to consider our thoughts as good or bad. We're not going to judge them. We're not going to attach meaning to them. We are not our thoughts, and thoughts are not facts. Okay? So how we do that is we're just going to notice and name them, whatever is showing up in your mind right now. And they can be so random, you know, thoughts just come and go. You might be having thoughts like, this is weird, I don't really understand this. You know, if, you know, thinking about from the mother perspective, you know, how often are we having thoughts like, I'm a bad mom, I'm not good enough, I don't know what I'm doing. These are all thoughts. And again, we get ourselves caught up and pulled away from the present moment when we start placing judgments or meaning to, I'm a bad mom. So we're going to break free of that judgment. We're just naming and noticing. And you can do that by saying something like, I'm having the thought that I'm a bad mom. I'm having the thought that I'm a bad mom. Or, there's that thought again. Showing up again. There's the bad mom thought. Okay? And you can start to expect some of these thoughts. Like, they just come and go. And then there's certain things that we engage in, and that same thought might pop up. And you can say, there it is again. Here comes the bad mom thought. But there's no judgment to it. Okay? We're noticing, naming, and kind of just letting it be. And how do we just let it be? How do we not attach meaning or get all caught up? How do we ground ourselves in the moment? What are some ways that we can ground ourselves? We do that through mindfulness. So we mindfully tune into our body now. We connect with our body. And you can do that by, you know, what does it feel like to have your 2 feet on the floor? Plant your 2 feet on the floor. Do you feel hard floor? Is it cold? Are you on squishy carpet? Are you outside with your feet in the grass? Do you have fuzzy slippers on? What does it feel like to have your feet planted on the floor? And then you're going to maybe roll your shoulders back, straighten your spine, You can feel what it's like to kind of gently turn your head back and forth, side to side. You can take your hands together and rub them. Notice the heat that's being generated as you rub them together. And when you stop and you put them close to your face, can you feel that heat? So these are all ways that you're connecting with your body. You're really feeling what it's like and being mindful of what it's like to be in your body. And then the third step is engage in whatever you're doing or the environment around you. And you do that through your 5 senses. So what do you see? You look around your space and really notice. Maybe there's like a pop of color, like I have a bright blue water bottle, so I'm noticing that. I'm noticing my orange highlighter. I'm noticing a picture that my daughter drew me. So I'm looking around my space and I'm noticing. Okay. And then what can you hear? So you're picking another sense and engaging with that. You can hear my voice talking to you, but can you hear something beyond my voice? I can hear the traffic outside. I can hear my cat purring next to me. Okay. I can hear myself talking to you through this microphone and the headset. I can taste my blueberry pomegranate drink, my nice cold water drink. I can smell it. It smells super good, super sweet. So you're engaging your 5 senses to engage fully in your environment and what you're doing. And you can do this anywhere in whatever you're doing. So if you ever find yourself getting completely caught up in the moment, overwhelmed, just not really present, and you need to kind of get back, you need to ground yourself, you need to drop anchor. You can visualize that yourself as that boat in the harbor that needs to drop the anchor. You can remember ACE. So acknowledge the thoughts, notice and name the thoughts, connect with your body, and engage your 5 senses to bring you fully to the present moment. I hope this helps. The next domain that we're going to talk about is neurological. And I know I don't need to say this, but I will. Neurology is not my specialty, okay? I'm not an expert in this area. However, I did do research and learned about the changes that can happen to the maternal brain or paternal brain. I'm also going to recommend a video after this by Dr. Pensack, who really gets into explaining it in a lot more detail and who's done research in this area. But based on the research that I did do, I learned that the maternal brain changes in structure and function in pregnancy and throughout the perinatal period. And before doing this research, I had no idea how much the brain changed. And you've often heard people talk about mommy brain and brain fog. And I've always thought of it like as a bad thing, right? But in learning about this and learning in detail about how the maternal brain changes, it makes so much sense. And that messaging that we're getting in society that, you know, we're not as smart or that maybe our cognition is declining, in motherhood is a myth. And Dr. Pensack, as she says it in her video, will say mommy brain needs a rebrand. Because what actually happens is that the brain in pregnancy and as it's preparing for this new caregiving role, as it's preparing for this baby, it begins purging information that it deems as less important or not necessary at this point for caregiving. And so what this is called, it's fine-tuning or pruning. So it's purging this information, it's getting rid of all the noise so that it's giving more of a focus on the information, the knowledge, the skills that are required for caregiving. And so the part of the brain responsible for things like empathy or socio-emotional intelligence, those parts of the brain actually light up. They're fired up. And this optimizes moms in certain ways so they become more attuned to the needs of other people. I'm assuming for baby, right? Which is amazing when you think about it. And there is research to show that dad's brains, paternal brain changes, and people in other caregiving roles, their brains have shown changes. Not in the same way and the same extent as the maternal brain, but there are changes that happen. So the research also shows brain changes in non-birthing parents who take on mothering and caregiving roles. Incredible. And it really kind of shows, the research shows that the time a parent spends with baby influences the development of the neurological pathways that is often referred to as the parental brain network. So the more time that you're spending with your baby and nurturing that baby and caring for that baby, it's going to stimulate and develop what's called the parental brain network. So on the next slide, I'll give a brief introduction to the recommended video. I believe I mentioned that there is a portion of that video if you just wanted to watch a clip of it. It'll talk about matrescence and you know, the mommy brain, and that's fine. You could also just choose to watch the whole video because it's a good one. And it's filled with lots of information, but you know, the video itself will be like close to an hour or more long, so you can decide whatever works for you. Okay, but it just kind of speaks more about the changes that happen, the neurological factors that happen throughout motherhood and in the caregiving role. So in the notes for this webinar, you should have a link there to the video. The recommended video is called The Power of the Maternal Brain by Dr. Nicole Pensack. The whole video is great, but the key points affiliated with this presentation and about matrescence, it's between the 8:59 minute and the 10:48 minute mark. Okay, thanks. So the next domain that we're going to be talking about is psychological. Okay, and so on your screens there, you'll be able to see all the different factors under psychological and the things that many moms go through. So there's heightened emotions, and with increased responsibility, there's feelings of overwhelm. You ruminate about things. Sometimes we're online researching and what's the best stroller and what kind of bottle should I buy and do I have the right next size for baby's clothes and did I get that letter for HR for being off work and did I submit the paperwork for baby's birth certificate? And all of these little things increase the mental load. Okay. And so not only are moms trying to manage their own mental health and well-being, but now they're considering the little humans that they've brought into the world. And a lot of times moms are also managing the tasks for the entire household. And even maybe their parents too. You might be in a situation where you're looking out or in some way you're involved in caregiving or helping out your parents who maybe are aging, and then you have little ones. Maybe there's certain things that you're looking after for your spouse. Maybe it's reminding them of certain appointments, right? And that's a lot. That's a lot of responsibility. And all of those extra things add up and increase the mental load. Okay. And as women, many of us try to be perfect. There's a lot of pressure to try to be perfect. And I think perfectionism can sometimes be a way that we feel in control. Okay. But it actually adds more pressure and feelings of overwhelm. And a lot of times with this domain, the psychological domain in motherhood, you can have reduced coping because you have so many things on your plate that you're responsible for. Your mental capacity and your ability to cope is reduced. Another way of looking at it is like you just don't have the bandwidth, right? And as we try to be perfect, as we try to be the perfect wife and the perfect mom and have the perfect house and still maintain this active lifestyle and get back to our skinny jeans and get back to socializing and making sure we're calling all of our friends and checking in and seeing how they're doing and being a good daughter, there's like no time left after. And because there's so many things, we're not perfect, right? There's things that we miss. There's things that don't go as planned. We're feeling overwhelmed. We're tired. And maybe those feelings of inadequacy are starting to creep up and get bigger. So these are all factors in the psychological domain in looking at motherhood, okay? But one point I really want to highlight here, because I think it's an important one and one that we need to hold on to, is that every challenge that we go through as a new mom or in our motherhood, wherever you're at in your motherhood journey, even if you're way into your motherhood journey, maybe you have adult children now. The amazing thing about it is every challenge that you've overcome, every adversity, every problem that you've solved to date has built resiliency. It's made you stronger. You have the capacity to overcome really difficult challenges. You've used problem-solving skills to get through difficult times and get to this moment that you're at right now. Okay. So I don't want you to lose sight of that because that's really, really important to hold on to. So you can expect, as you're in your motherhood journey, to feel all of these different things. You know, to feel that extra pressure, to feel inadequate, to feel like you're not a good mom, to feel like I just don't have any more room up in my brain. There's just too many tabs open. If you were to imagine a computer screen and you have all these different tabs, think of that like your mind. And there's all these tabs open and you're trying to flip through each screen and you can't close any of them out yet because there's still another task that you got to do before you can close it out. That's a lot. So that's the psychological, but it's also, there's also a difference between the psychological domain and this aspect, these factors, as opposed to perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Okay? For some, there's an underlying mental health disorder. So these factors are still at play, but they could be impacting and exacerbating an underlying mood and anxiety disorder. Okay? Or a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. We're going to be talking about that in more detail towards the end of the presentation. But it's important to know that there is a difference. So these things are common. These aspects that you're looking at on your screen right now, they're things to be expected in motherhood. They're part of the motherhood journey. They're normal. They're hard, but they're normal. Okay? They're common. And then later we're going to learn the signs and symptoms and things to look for in terms of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders so that you know the difference. Because there's treatment for those things. Okay, there's things that may be necessary, and there's even things that are like an emergency, right? You need proper treatment and proper care to address those things, and that's none of this is your fault, right? Some of us are just predispositioned to that, right? You could have 3 children on your first 2 pregnancies. There's no mood and anxiety disorder. And then randomly on baby number 3, you might experience postpartum depression or anxiety or panic or OCD, right? There's certain risk factors that make people more susceptible to perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, okay? And we'll talk about that as well. But I just wanted to highlight that there is a difference. So this is the psychological domain, and these are the things that are common in motherhood. And then there's a difference between the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Okay. So I'm going to move on now to the next slide. I thought this would be a good time to go over another coping strategy. This is pulled from acceptance and commitment therapy. As I mentioned before, I've received training by Russ Harris, and this is a method called Drop the Struggle. And a way that we drop the struggle is through 4 A's of acceptance. So that would be to acknowledge, allow, accommodate, and appreciate. So these are the 4 A's that we can try to remember to practice dropping the struggle. And dropping the struggle can really help us let go. You know, the more we try to fight our thoughts and feelings or make them go away. You know, how often are we trying to just feel better and, you know, be happy and not think certain things? But we can't force ourselves to stop thinking certain things. Thoughts are random. They're going to come and go. They're going to pop in our mind. If I was to say to you, I don't want you to think about a pink elephant, chances are you're thinking about a pink elephant right now, because our brains are just like automatic like that. Our brains are problem-solving machines. They're always just processing information and, you know, filtering out information, trying to anticipate things to help us solve problems that we might not even have yet. They could be perceived problems. And so sometimes we get into this big struggle in our minds, and we become anxious and we become elevated and activated and triggered, all caught up in a situation that may not even be an issue yet, or may never be an issue. That's really what anxiety does. You know, it kind of worries about the future, focuses on the issues that could happen, the things that could go wrong in the future. And it takes us out of the present moment. So we can really get into this personal struggle, the struggle with ourselves and our thoughts and our mind. We can also get in struggles with relationships with other people. If we get caught up in trying to control the situation or control other people, that takes a lot of energy, a lot of time, and it's not effective. At the end of the day, we cannot control other people's reactions, other people's decisions. We cannot control other people. We can control ourselves, how we react or how we respond to certain things, how we choose to move through certain things and cope with certain things, okay? We can control our behavior. So our thoughts are going to come and go randomly. They're not good or bad. They're just thoughts. They're not facts. And once we learn that, once we know, like, not to get caught up in this idea that we're a bad person if we have a bad thought, because that's not true. We all have bad thoughts, what we deem as bad thoughts, okay? But I'm inviting you to take out the moral aspect out of it. Stop considering good thoughts and bad thoughts. Just look at them as thoughts. They're going to come and go. They're going to pop into our minds. And what we can do is notice and name them and think, huh, that's kind of strange. Well, there's that thought again, right? And that's a part of the A, acknowledge. And we need to start allowing people to be who they are and respond however they need to respond and do what they need to do. We need to focus on us and how we're going to move through the world and what's important to us and what we stand for, what kind of person we want to be. And when we can do that, it's part of dropping the struggle. And it can really help shift our relationships, because when we start trying to control other people, or if we get frustrated and caught up in trying to control other people, it damages relationships. It's not effective. So dropping the struggle, if you were to imagine yourself as a new mom, okay, I'm just going to run through this scenario. So you're a new mom, just home from the hospital. Let's say you haven't slept in like the past 48 hours. You haven't showered. Your clothes are stained. You can smell sour milk. You're exhausted. And you have this teeny tiny baby fast asleep on your chest. And you're in this big, comfy, reclining chair. You don't feel like yourself. Your body is aching. It looks different. If you were to look at yourself in the mirror, you don't even recognize that person. You are just like, who is that? You can feel the hormones pumping through your body. It's almost like you're vibrating. And did you ever have like that ball in your throat? Like it feels like at any minute, all your feelings and emotions are just going to come pouring out. It's just like sitting right here. That's how you feel. And so as your baby is sleeping on your chest, you notice how quiet it is. There's no one else home. And there's sun coming in through the window and casting a glow in the room. And you close your eyes gently and you begin to rest. And then all of a sudden, you hear, "Hello, it's your Auntie Joe. I don't mean to scare you. I just used your spare key to let myself in. I hope you don't mind." And you immediately feel sick, like panic. You do not want anyone to see you like this. And you certainly don't want anyone near your brand new baby. You've worked so hard to get that baby out. That baby is finally here. You've waited 9 months to meet this baby. And they're fast asleep and you're just having this beautiful moment with them. And like, what if Auntie Joe, you don't know where Auntie Joe's been? What if she has like a cold or the flu or RSV? What if she's prone to cold sores and passes one on to the baby? And your mind starts coming up with all of these different scenarios, these different like worst case scenarios. And you look around and your house is a mess. You're not wearing a bra. You're still wearing a diaper from the hospital, from delivery. And you just want to hide. Now, some of you will be able to relate to this scenario. Others may not. There are some people who really prefer to be surrounded by people, to not be alone with baby, to almost feel like a disconnect or scared to be left alone with baby, and that is totally normal too, right? Afraid, like, am I going to break this baby? Am I going to be able to keep this baby alive? I don't know what I'm doing. We all feel like that as new moms. Those thoughts creep into our minds. Do I really know what I'm doing? I have no idea. You come home from the hospital and it's like, now what? What do I have to do? Now that the nurses are not here, there's no one monitoring us or checking in. What the heck am I supposed to do? But then, for others, the thought of somebody coming into your space and potentially taking your baby or taking control of the situation or trying to have conversations with you and you're not there. Like your mind is elsewhere. That can be so, so hard. And for many people, they'll have this strong desire to be alone, to pull away from family and friends and supports. Some of that could be a sign of the baby blues, which is common postpartum. Okay, and we'll talk about that. Some of it might be early signs of a potential perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. And a lot of it is normal, right? Because no mom in the universe wants to be judged. None of us know what we're doing, okay? It's hard to feel confident, especially if it's your first one, to be able to set boundaries with our family and friends or to accept help or to allow people into your home when it doesn't look how it normally does, or to be vulnerable and open and allow people to see you struggling. It's all very scary. So many of us mask every day. You know, fake it till you make it, to make it look like we have it all together and that we're doing okay. And some of that can be effective, right? Because we can't be confident and self-assured all the time. That's not realistic. And so sometimes, even though we have these feelings that creep up, we can still do the hard thing anyway. That's a part of being courageous and brave. Doing the hard thing anyway, even if we don't feel great, even if we have fear about it. So Auntie Joe comes knocking at the door and you're feeling miserable and you want to hide. You do not want to see anybody right now. You don't want anyone touching your baby. So what's the first thing you can do to drop the struggle here? What does, acceptance and commitment therapy and Russ Harris tell us? Step one is to acknowledge. So we're going to acknowledge Auntie Joe. Oh, hi, Auntie Joe. And then we're going to allow. Step two, allow. Come on in. We're in the living room. You might have that quiver in your voice, and that's okay. Step three, we're going to make space. We're going to accommodate. And this can be really hard, right? Because part of you is just wanting to shut this down. And that is still an option. But if it can create more struggle, right? It can keep perpetuating the struggle of, I don't want to be in this situation. I need to try to control this. I don't want, Auntie Joe shouldn't be here, and it can create more and more struggle. So if you're looking to drop that struggle and be in the present moment and create space and be flexible, psychologically flexible, then we're going to accommodate. And one way to do that could be saying something like, can I get you a tea, a coffee, cold drink? Right? So step one, we're acknowledging. Step two, we're allowing. Step three, we're accommodating. So we're adjusting to that situation. And let's just say Auntie Joe comes in like a hurricane, like oblivious to how she's, coming across. She's carrying all these bags and they're really loud and she's taking up a lot of space. And she comes in and she brings all this extra stuff into your home and you're kind of cringing like, oh no, what is all this stuff? So you're becoming increasingly annoyed at the noise and the mess. But then you see your aunt opens the fridge, she's unpacking, and she's starting to fill your freezer with all these pre-portioned homemade meals. And she looks at you with a big smile, and she ushers you back to your chair. And she says, sorry, love, I never meant to disturb you. She takes a quick peek at the baby, returns to the kitchen, and Auntie Jo proceeds to unload and load the dishwasher for you. She's cleaning down the countertops. She's making herself a cup of tea. She's filling up a large water bottle with icy cold water for you. And she brings out fresh homemade cookies. And they're the oatmeal chocolate chip kind. You know, a perfect little snack to have on hand for those times where you're really, really hungry and you have baby in your arms and you just need something. And Auntie Jo is a talker, so she's chatting away a mile a minute, and you wish that the chatter would stop. But still you decide to practice step 4, which is appreciate. And you look at your aunt through a new lens, one with gratitude and appreciation. And the more that you look at her, and the more that you look at what's happening, what's truly happening in this situation, the more appreciation grows. Auntie Jo cooked enough food to cover off lunches for the next 2 weeks. And our snacks were perfect for those late night feedings. You know, when you're really, really hungry and it's like 3 a.m. and you have baby in your arms and you're looking around and you just need something quick and easy, but something that's going to make those hunger pangs go away. And she knew that. So these 4 A's help us drop the struggle. Now, nobody has to do this, and there's all kinds of scenarios out there. I'm not suggesting that, you know, every relationship, you know, you're just going to be accommodating and appreciating and not have any boundaries. That's not what I'm suggesting, because boundaries are really important. Okay? But sometimes we end up creating more struggle, and we contribute to our own psychological pain and suffering by keeping the struggle going because we're trying to control other people or the situation. And so by dropping that struggle, we are mindfully bringing ourselves into the present moment and beginning to accept what is actually happening and coming up with ways to be able to cope. Acknowledge that we do not want this. We wish this wasn't happening. However, we're able to look at it through a new light and appreciate it for what it is, and then move on. So often we get stuck and we can't move forward because we're just stuck in the struggle. So I hope at some point this is a strategy that you can try and that it will be effective for you and give you some comfort as you navigate all the different scenarios that can come up along the motherhood journey. Okay, social domain, another huge domain. And, you know, in this domain, we're going to be looking at different kinds of relationships. So there's like relationships that we have with our partners or spouses. There's the relationship we have with our children. There's a relationship that we have with our parents or our family and extended family, our siblings. Okay. You have relationships with friends, so friendships, or the community, maybe your workplace, so coworkers and managers, those kind of relationships. And when you become a mother, relationships can change in many, many ways. You might start to feel differently about certain relationships. You might look at the relationship in a different way than you did before being a mom. Your interests and your desires can change. So the things that you once loved to do maybe have changed. Your perspective can change, which impacts relationships, because maybe you and your friend or you and your partner have always been on the same page. And since becoming a mom, maybe you have a different outlook. And so now there's this clash, and it's kind of making it hard to stay close or connected with someone. And when there's that clash, like, our behaviors can change as well, and the dynamics in the relationship can change. Right? So, when your focus becomes more on baby or on being a mom, there may be less time or less interest in socializing or engaging in certain activities, going to certain places, right? And so these can be incredibly impactful. And I'm even looking at, when you think about your partner or your spouse, that can be really, really tricky, because there can be a lot of disconnect that happens. Okay? Especially if, in those early days, if mom is staying home with the baby for maternity leave, and if mom is seen as the primary caregiver and spending most of the time with baby, and if dad is working outside the home, and then maybe mom is taking on more of the mental load, there can be frustration and a disconnect, maybe even resentment. And for the partner, they might feel left out, because all of a sudden you're seeing this connection happening between baby and mom, or even it could be the opposite. It could be baby and dad, or baby and caregiver have this bond and connection. And then there's the disconnect between the other person. The person's on the outside feeling left out, or really feeling like they can't relate because their experience is different. And that can be so hard to talk about in relationships. Because again, when we're feeling sleep deprived, if we're in any kind of physical pain, if we're having a lot of those psychological things of, perfectionism, or feeling inadequate, or ruminating about different things, it's hard for us to show up in relationships in a grounded, calm way, in a rational way, because our body is just depleted in many ways, right? We're feeling depleted. We're not feeling like ourselves. And it's really, really tricky. It's also tricky too when those perspectives do change, and so people that you were once really, really close with maybe you're not understanding one another anymore. So there might be misunderstandings or changes happening. And it's hard on both people because mom needs the support. Mom's in the thick of it. She's going through this big transformation in her brain, in her body, in her mind, in her relationships, right? So, and it changes in many of the relationships when you think about it, because it could be the change in relationship with the spouse, and then friendships could be changed. Maybe you're feeling less disconnected from your workmates because now you're off on maternity leave or parental leave. So there's a disconnect happening there. The other thing is this particular domain, it can bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings about how you were raised in your childhood. Okay? Naturally, when you become a parent or a mom, you are going to reflect on how you were parented. That's how we learn, right? That's how we learned about parenting, is through how we were raised. And so if you're somebody who is not happy with all the aspects of your childhood, if there was abuse or neglect, or maybe you just have a different outlook or approach on parenting because generations change, and the more research that there is, the more things that we learn about in terms of parenting, perhaps your style is different than how you were raised or how your parents raised you. Okay. So it can be a triggering time because having your own baby can trigger you to think about your childhood. And it can make you feel upset if it's bringing up memories about painful experiences. It can also propel you into wanting to do different things and maybe changing your approach or changing your parenting style. And so if your parents are still in your life and you're taking a different approach or a different style, that can be really tricky sometimes, because in many ways, there's a difference there, and it's hard to communicate thoughts and feelings around those differences in parenting styles. Okay. So sometimes there's conflict that comes out of that. And this is really tricky. I think it's also really important to acknowledge the role of social media today, and how online, on like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, whatever platform that you may be using, there's images of these perfect families and perfect mothers, these mothers who have bounced back and lost all the weight, who are out involved and volunteering in everything, who have their children in everything, who always look so put together, right? They're not capturing the real life struggle. Okay, they're only showing a little snapshot of time, and that snapshot is likely heavily filtered to look a certain way. Okay. So that can be really damaging, because for somebody who is struggling, because most people are in motherhood because it's hard because of these factors, okay? That's reinforcing that sense of there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, or the feelings of inadequacy, because you're looking at yourself and you're comparing yourself socially to somebody, and that's not real life. It's also really tricky when you make certain parenting decisions that may not be the norm or might not be what your parents or your friends uh, choose to do or believe in. There can be social stigma around certain parenting styles or decisions. So then you're feeling isolated or different than the people that used to support you. So again, it's really important to look at this and know that relationships are going to change in many, many ways as you become a mother. That's to be expected because you are evolving as a person, as a human being. Your mind is expanding. Your mind is filtering out all the things that you once thought were important but are not so important anymore. And you're honing in on this role as a caregiver. And so in that area, your brain is expanding and it's attuned to this aspect of life. And so your priorities and things that you view as important are changing. And so the people in your life are naturally going to notice those changes and feel the difference. So I think it's important to learn that there's some relationships that maybe they're only meant to be in your life for a season, right? Maybe you no longer have much in common with those folks, and that's okay. There's times in our lives where we're closer to some people, and then there's times that where we take a step back, right? And then there's some relationships that you know that you want to keep in your life. So with your partner or your family, if those are relationships that are important to you and that you're wanting to, stay close with those people and connected to those people, having this knowledge about how the relationship dynamics can change because of motherhood can give you a way to talk about it, to approach your partner, to approach relationships and to be like, I got a lot on my plate right now, and my point of view is changing, my perspective is changing, and I'm really feeling like this disconnect, or I know I might not be up for going out all the time like I once was. My focus has changed right now. My whole world seems to just be on baby right now. And I recognize that I used to spend all my time with you. And I used to go out all the time and party all the time. And now I'm just like not there. But I still love you and I still care about you. And maybe there's other ways that we can connect. And with your spouse, it could be having the conversations of like, I recognize that there's this disconnect here. And I'm here with baby all the time, and you're out in the world working, and it's like we're two passing ships at night. So what can we do in what ways can we find time to connect and just talk about it, right? It's not easy, but it is a part of the motherhood journey. There will be changes in dynamics and relationships, the way that you view relationships, the things that are important to you. And that's okay. That's what's meant to happen. Because again, you're on this transformative journey. You're changing and evolving and growing. And with that, there will be changes in relationships too. Okay? So this is a quote by Coley. And I thought it was an important one to acknowledge. And it says, research has shown that intensive mothering, The belief that moms should sacrifice all of their time, their resources, and their energy for their children and find ultimate fulfillment from their motherhood role impacts most moms in Western societies, regardless of race, religion, cultural upbringing, or socioeconomic. So there are many nuances with these domains. It would be impossible to cover all the aspects, but I've done my best to provide an overview of each with examples in the slides. So this is another coping strategy that complements the other ones that we've talked about earlier on. And it's thinking about what's within your control and what's outside of your control. And this is kind of like it can be used as a quick tool to ground us in the moment. When we catch ourselves, when we notice ourselves getting activated and getting pulled away from the present moment, say if we're just overwhelmed and we're just getting lost and caught up with all of the things that are happening around us, other people's behaviors and attitudes, we can get drawn into that and get caught up and try to control the situation. And in that attempt to control, we start creating this struggle. And that's kind of what we spoke about before. So when we, acknowledge what's happening, when we give space to it, when we allow and appreciate that, everybody has their own stuff going on and they're going to behave how they behave, and we can't own what other people do. In that sense, we drop the struggle and we just start focusing on the things within our own control. So this kind of ties in really nicely with dropping the struggle and even dropping anchor, right? To ground yourself in the present moment. And so what you can do is you can think about this diagram. We can add this diagram as part of your little toolkit as you're navigating motherhood. It's one thing that you can, draw upon and think about when you find yourself getting hooked by different thoughts or feelings, emotions, or activated by certain things that people are saying or doing around you. Because at the end of the day, we cannot control what's already happened, so we cannot control the past and everything that's led up to this moment. There's certain things that we can control that's going to help us move forward and grow and propel us, towards our goals in the future. But we can't actually control the future. We don't know what's going to happen next. As much as we can guess or predict, as much as we try to control, we can't control everything. So there's going to be obstacles and challenges and good times and hard times that are going to continue to happen into the future. And that we know is life, right? That's what happens. So reflecting on the things that are within our control. So where we invest our time and our energy, what we give attention to, that's within our control. How we invest our time and energy. Okay? You can make a choice. You can choose whether or not you're going to go down a rabbit hole and get caught up with what, your friends are doing, or what your neighbor's doing, or what Auntie Joe is doing, right? But it's important to reflect on, okay, am I investing? Is this a good investment for me? How is this helping me? Is this helpful? Right? We get to choose where we invest our time, our energy, and our focus. We decide how we show up in this world, how we're going to speak to others, how we're going to treat other people. We cannot control how people are going to respond to us and treat us. We can only control how we treat other people. We can set boundaries within our relationships, and it's incredibly difficult to do at times, especially if you're somebody who avoids conflict or is kind of like a known to be a peacekeeper or people pleaser. This can be really hard to set boundaries. And most of the times when we start setting boundaries, the initial response of other people is not a positive one because they're used to gaining something from you, right? So when you say no, or when you set a boundary and say, like, I can't help out this time. I got too much on my plate right now. Thank you. Hopefully I'll catch you soon, or whatever that boundary is, there's going to be reaction by the other people in your life. And the tricky part with that is being okay or accepting that that's outside of your control. You cannot control how another person feels, how they're going to react to your boundary. You can't own that. But in order to preserve your own health and well-being and the health and well-being of your family, your little unit, there are certain boundaries that you may need to set. And that can be difficult. But it is within your control. You can also decide whether or not you forgive somebody. So if you were in a conflict with somebody, or if somebody's wronged you, you can decide whether or not you're going to forgive them. So outside of your control, you can't control what other people think of you, what other people are going to say to you. You can't control the things that are happening around you. The economy, the political climate, your in-laws, your neighbors, your friends, your job, what's happening in the office. You cannot control the attitude of other people, their beliefs, their perceptions, how they feel, how they behave. You cannot control how other people react. And so once we understand what's within our control and what's outside of our control, it can help ground us in the moment. Because sometimes, it really comes down to mindfulness. Sometimes we're just pulled out of the moment, we're hooked, and we don't even realize that we're getting the things that we're stressing about or that we're getting overwhelmed by or triggered by do not involve us. It has nothing to do with us, or it's outside of our control. So really, what is the point? And maybe there's a more helpful or effective way that we can focus our time and energy that's going to give us the space that we need to take care of ourselves and to be able to take care of the baby and your little family. So I hope you find this diagram helpful and that it's something that you can add to your little toolbox, of strategies, and help you when you're feeling overwhelmed. Okay? Now we're going to dive into talking about culture, spirituality, and a couple of other domains that are kind of interconnected, like There's the moral domain and existential domain, and they're all kind of intertwined, um, and can have commonalities with them. Okay, so when we think about the cultural domain, motherhood can differ across cultures and generations, and we really learn about the role of mother from our family and from our culture, how we grew up, how the people in our lives who are closest to us, the traditions and customs that we follow, the values and beliefs that we hold, that really tells us a lot about our view of mothers. And it's different across cultures. Okay? And so there can be this pressure, if the role and view of mother was that perhaps in your family, the mother always stayed at home when her babies were born for the first years of their life. They didn't work. So when you look back through the generations in your culture and your family unit, moms always stayed at home to raise the kids. And now, in your generation and in your experience and your life and the decisions that you've made, you have an amazing career. And you also want to be a mom. And you have that right, and you can be. But there's this pressure or this viewpoint from your family and your culture that you should be staying at home to look after those kids, and that really kids should have their mother at home to be the primary caregiver in those early years. So then you have that clash, that struggle, that difference there. And that can be very challenging to navigate. It can come with stigma, right? You can feel pressured or unaccepted if you choose something different. So perhaps you and your partner have decided that your partner is going to be staying at home. They're going to take parental leave, and you're going to go back to work. You're there for the delivery and maybe a couple of weeks, and then you're going to be working, the one working. And that can create a lot of kind of friction because it's going against the cultural norm that you grew up in. One of the interesting things that stood out to me in the research in terms of the spiritual domain was how many moms have a spiritual awakening or spiritual growth. Many women go through that after they give birth. And, it could be because spirituality comes down to finding meaning and purpose in life. So becoming a mother for some is a way that it brings that meaning and purpose in their life. For some, it could be the first time they ever have faith. Perhaps they grew up in a home and in a culture that they didn't really believe. I know for many, many people, when I reflect on different client stories or even people in my own personal life, if there was traumatic childhood experiences or adverse childhood experiences, people lose faith. And in motherhood, when they bring about new life, or if they're, let's say you had a traumatic birth, or if you had difficulty getting pregnant and then you got pregnant, all of a sudden you're looking at the world in a different way. Your perspectives are changing. You have this new sense of hope, meaning, and purpose. And so for some, it's a time where, like, all of a sudden they're starting to believe that there's more. And that could be a God, that could just be there's more in the universe and energy. There's all different kinds of beliefs out there. But the underlying piece of spirituality is that it's finding meaning and purpose in life. Okay? And so culture and religious beliefs, they often kind of weave together. Spirituality is something that many people turn to cope when there's difficult challenges. But as I kind of alluded to before with the adverse childhood experiences, if you're experiencing loss, if you can't get pregnant, if you did get pregnant and you lost a baby, if that baby passed away, for some, you may feel like you've lost your purpose. Like your life doesn't have meaning anymore. Or maybe you've lost the faith. And so for you, it's looking at, in your motherhood journey, are there ways that you can find meaning and purpose again? If you've lost hope, if you've lost faith, what can you do to start bringing back meaning and purpose in your life? And examples of this could be, for moms who have lost children, if their children have died, and they've gone on to start like a foundation or a charity, or they've devoted their lives to raising awareness about a certain thing, or they've found ways to honor their child or their children that gives them that sense of purpose. It's not going to take away the grief. It's not going to bring them back, but it's giving a meaning and a purpose in life. And then for many, many, many women and moms, they go through this period. It's almost like an existential crisis. And we spoke about that before. You might look at yourself in the mirror one day and really ask yourself, like, who is that? Who am I? That is not, I don't recognize that person. And that really speaks to like the existential domain. And it's also important in this domain to acknowledge that, like, you are more than just your role as mother. So your whole identity is not as a mom. There are other aspects. There was life before you became a mom. Okay? There were things that you loved or that you were passionate about, or things that you did in life that made you you. There's characteristics that make you you, personality traits, and that all contribute to your identity. But what's happening is that there is an identity shift, and people can lose themselves in motherhood. It's like because the focus is so heavily on taking care of this baby that all the other stuff gets put to the side, and people lose themselves in that. And so then when you think about when the children are raised and you hear about empty nesters, when their children become like, you know, young adults and they're starting to leave the house and go off and on adventures, whether it's to university or living on their own or with their partners, and then it's you left behind wondering, like, now what? Really tying back that question, who am I now that? Who am I now that my kids are grown? Yes, you are still a mother, but what do I do with this time now? Because so much of my identity and so much of what I did every day was devoted to motherhood. So keeping this domain in mind as you navigate this time can be helpful, okay? Understanding that if you have moments where you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't recognize yourself, then that's a normal part of this process, of this transformation. And if you were to look at yourself and think back to how you were in childhood, becoming a teenager, I am sure there was moments when you look at that person in the mirror and all of a sudden you got like pimples on your face, you got hair, your body is changing shape, and you don't even recognize yourself. It's like it happens overnight and you're just like, who is that? Much the same. There's moments that you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and you're not going to know who that person is looking back at you. Motherhood changes the way that we look at the world, how we interact with the world, how we show up. It can also kind of make us feel uneasy in a lot of ways, especially like when you look at the world right now that we live in. And there's a lot of challenging things happening in terms of wars and the political climate and climate change and the environment, natural disasters, all of these things that can really kind of like make us concerned or lead us down to thoughts like, what kind of world am I raising my children in? So again, if you find yourself having those kinds of thoughts creep in, that's when we go back to that, what's within my control and what's outside of my control. Okay, so you reflect back on that, bring yourself back into the present moment, acknowledge that it's normal to have those kind of thoughts and worries, of course. You're trying to control, you want to keep your children safe. You want them to have the best possible life. And you're scared. What kind of world is this now that we're living in? And what kind of future is ahead for them? But if we get drawn into that and pulled away from the present, that's going to draw us down that rabbit hole and really impact our mental health in a negative way. The existential domain can invite us to really look at how our identity is shifted, and not necessarily in a bad way. How has becoming a mother expanded your worldview? How have you, like, your perceptions of family and culture and spirituality and all these different domains of life. If you find yourself getting caught up in those ruminating thoughts, those worries, those concerns about the kind of world that your kids are living in, whether or not you're a good mom, who am I, all of these thoughts, and you can't get yourself out of it. Another helpful strategy can be to imagine that your thoughts are on clouds and you are just observing them pass you by. So if you were to imagine standing by a river on a beautiful fall day, surrounded by vibrant trees, you notice that the leaves are gently falling from the branches. As each leaf lands on the water, it's quickly carried away down by a current. So as you are caught up in your thoughts, your mind is racing, I invite you to imagine taking one of those thoughts. So if it's your I'm a bad mom thought, you take I am a bad mom and you envision it on a leaf. And that leaf is falling. That thought is on the leaf. And then the current is carrying it away. And much the same, imagine you are lying in a green field, looking up at the sky, and you see all of these fluffy clouds. And you can put your individual thoughts on these clouds. I'm a bad mom. What's going to happen to my child? What kind of world are they growing up in? What if they fall? What if I never sleep again? All of these thoughts, you can place them on the clouds and you're just observing them as they float by. This is another coping strategy as a part of acceptance and commitment therapy. You are mindfully acknowledging the thoughts, putting them on a leaf that's being taken away down the river, clouds passing by. Some people even like things like trains. So different sections of the train zooming by, you can put your thoughts on those. And it's kind of like a visual and a practice that can bring you back to the moment and really unhook you from all of these swirling, racing thoughts. So give that a go, add that to your toolbox, and hopefully it's one that you find effective. The moral domain, that really speaks to a person's beliefs around what is right and wrong. And so there can be many different common moral dilemmas in motherhood, a lot of different debates out there about what is best or what is right or wrong. And you can get easily drawn in. It's hard to avoid them, really. So for instance, epidural versus a natural birth. Depending on your beliefs, your culture, the customs. Perhaps you really want a birth where you're not going to have any medicine. It's going to be a vaginal birth. You don't want a C-section, or you don't want any kind of pain management or epidural. But as we spoke about, we don't have control about what is going to happen next, what's going to happen in the future. So if that baby ends up in distress or ends up in a frank breech position and the doctor is saying like, or recommending a C-section, you may feel like that moral dilemma. It's like, what do I do here? Like, every part of me wants to have a natural birth. This is what I've been preparing for. This is what I want. But now things have changed and the doctor's making different recommendations. So how do I move forward? Breastfeeding or formula feeding? And that's a big debate, and that's something that's changed from culture to culture and with generations. So when I was a baby, it was much more common to be given carnation milk, tin milk. I was a carnation baby. I believe that my mother breastfed for the first 6 weeks, maybe. But for many families, this was, and in that generation, in that time, this was the more common way of feeding the baby in the 80s. But then there's another group who may value breastfeeding so much for that bonding. Perhaps it's like for the cost, it's cost effective because you're able, for many moms are able to produce the milk. You're not having to buy milk, so you can provide for your baby through your milk. And it's really, seen as a part of the cultural norms and traditions and the role of mom to breastfeed. And you may have heard in recent years, like that there's these really big shift happening. So it's like, for a while there, it might have been pushed for formula feeding. And now it's okay, well, you might hear terms like breast is best. So it can create this dilemma. Then there's things like gender reveals, and displaying whether you're having a boy or a girl, announcing whether you're having a boy or a girl. But then what does that mean for that baby in the future and for all the people in life who don't identify as boy or girl? That they're non-binary or gender non-conforming or fall somewhere else on the gender queer spectrum. So gender, whether you feel it's right or wrong to only dress your child in pink clothes, your little girl in pink clothes, or your boy in blue clothes, or a boy must only play with trucks and girls play with Barbies, that can really create this like moral dilemma and this divide. And of course, when we saw a lot with the pandemic and COVID-19, vaccine versus no vaccine, and that's a really common debate these days, a moral dilemma, whether or not to vaccinate your child. And this can affect relationships, friendships, your work, depending on where you work. If you're working in healthcare, there might be that extra pressure to, to vaccinate. And so this is a big component of the motherhood journey as well. These moral dilemmas that can come up can impact our mental health big time. Because at the end of the day, we're all doing the best we can with where we're at, with the information and knowledge that we have in that moment in time, with our coping skills in that moment in time. So hopefully with this information, with this knowledge, it will better equip mothers to be aware that these are the common type of dilemmas that can come up, these conversations, these debates, and you and your best friend, or you and your sister, or you and your mom could have totally different morals or beliefs about what is right and wrong. And in reality, there's no written book out there to say this is what's right and this is what's wrong when it comes to these kinds of things. There's social norms, there's cultural norms, there's expectations. There's political parties out there that will present their angle and say this is what's right, and then there's another one saying this is what's right. But it's not, in reality, it's not black and white. There's a whole lot of gray here. And these kinds of issues and decisions and choices can impact a mother's well-being and experience becoming a mother. So the ecological domain, it really kind of looks at a mother's relationship with others and the environment. And I touched on this briefly before. So that's thinking about like, you're increasingly more worried about natural disasters or climate change. So perhaps you're maybe a mom who's looking at using reusable diapers or making homemade baby food, using reusable containers instead of disposing of everything. Perhaps you're looking at, hand-me-down clothes or thrift stores for baby clothes instead of buying new. So you're decreasing your spending and the footprint that you're having on the world, decreasing consumerism. And so that's incorporating the ecological lens and domain. And it is a factor in motherhood because again, it speaks to like that decision making that's involved and how it's going to impact the other domains. So the ecological could impact your social relationships, again, the things that you decide versus what your friends are deciding to do. It can impact the cultural domain because culturally you might have been a certain way certain expectations, but now given this perspective, you might want to do things differently. So it's yet another factor that can impact a mother's experience. And then there's the economic domain, and this can be huge. So, especially in this time, in this generation where many moms are wanting to advance in their careers, or they have to work full time in order to be able to provide for the family. You know, in this economy, many families consist of two working parents in order to be able to afford their homes or to provide for their families. So then if moms are seen or expected to be the ones to stay at home with the baby, that might lead to a professional setback in their career or put limitations on their career. Perhaps they're not able to, at this time, live up to their full potential or meet their goals. Sadly, there's still gender gaps in pay. And there's still that view, like women are treated differently still in different sectors. So if you have a woman on track for becoming a partner, and then, in a business, and then she gets pregnant, there are still women out there getting turned down or no longer considered, or even at risk of losing their job, because now they are seen as not being as committed, as reliable, distracted. And so it's like this messaging that moms can't do both. The other huge factor here is like childcare issues. Who is going to look after the child while both parents are working? And if you can't find affordable childcare or safe, affordable childcare, that can delay a parent or mother's return to work. And there's many moms out there who've even had to resign from their jobs that they loved and they were great at, because they can't find childcare. Or perhaps the company that they work for, their benefits are really bad. There's not enough family leave, or health benefits. And so moms are having to pivot. And we're starting to see a lot more of these creative businesses coming out where moms can be their own boss, or you might have heard the term mompreneur. So they're finding these creative ways to work from home or work remotely, or have like a flexible schedule, and they can work for themselves, finding alternate streams of revenue in order to be able to care for their family and provide for their families. Having an understanding of matrescence as a developmental, challenging, but ultimately normal process that is also full of potential may in fact be protective against postpartum depression. So PMAD, what does that stand for? That's perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Perinatal is the time span from conception to 1 year postpartum. Under the M, the mood, that would be things like depression, bipolar 1 and 2, psychosis during the perinatal period. And under anxiety, generalized anxiety, panic, OCD, and PTSD. So OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, and PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Those can come about during the perinatal period. And disorders are the symptoms that, negatively affect daily life, okay, during that perinatal period. You may have heard of the baby blues or postpartum blues, okay, and the baby blues are not the same thing as perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. In fact, baby blues are a common experience for postpartum mothers. It typically shows up between like 3 to 5 days postpartum. And, it's usually the time where there's like a surge of hormones. Your hormones are really changing at that time. Often it's around the same time that the milk is coming in. So it's like these rapid changes in hormones. There's breast engorgement. There's exhaustion and pain from birth. And it's also a time of transitioning from like the hospital to home, or perhaps if your little one is needing to be in the NICU, then maybe you're, in between the hospital and the NICU. And so there's a lot of tearfulness. There's a lot of like fluctuations in your mood. You could be more irritable. But this is something that typically resolves on its own, okay? Within like 2 to 3 weeks. So it shows up so many days after the birth when there's a lot of changes happening in the body. And, having these mood fluctuations, it's normal. And it shows up for many, many people. In fact, Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Women's Health reports that up to 85% of postpartum moms experience the baby blues. Okay, so now we're going to learn about the difference between the baby blues, the super common experience, to perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. This might be a good time to take another break to check out a YouTube video. It's from Out of the Fog interview with Donnie Cody and Dr. Archana Vidyasankar. Dr. Vidyasankar is our perinatal psychiatrist here in Newfoundland and Labrador. The key message that I'd like you to take away that coincides with our presentation is around the 1 minute 45-second mark and the 10-minute 10-second minute mark. So go check it out when you can, and then you'll start to get to know Dr. Archana Vidyasankar, hear what she has to say about perinatal mental health services in the province. Perinatal depression is the most common complication associated with childbirth. Just think about that for a second. It's the most common complication associated with childbirth. Wow, that's huge. It differs from the baby blues because it persists and it increases in severity. So remember, the baby blues usually show up around the 3 to 5 day mark, and it typically resolves on its own after 2 to 3 weeks. Perinatal depression will persist and increase, and it doesn't necessarily show up right around the 3 to 5 day mark. It could show up later. And it really begins interfering with mom's daily functioning, mom's ability to carry out day-to-day tasks and look after baby, look after herself. It can occur in women with no prior history of mental health issues. It can happen in mothers who've had smooth pregnancies and deliveries and who've had good support at home. It can happen randomly on your second or third child. There are risk factors, and some of them include genetics. So if you have presence of depression in a blood relative, you may be more predispositioned or at higher risk of perinatal depression. If you're someone who's experienced chronic sleep deprivation or has a colicky baby, perhaps you've had medical complications or your baby's had medical complications. You could be somebody who's had really dramatic hormonal shifts. Or if you've had a history, another pregnancy and birth, and experienced perinatal depression in the past, or clinical depression in the past, these are all risk factors for perinatal depression. Next, we have perinatal bipolar disorder. And that really bipolar consists of two phases. So there's lows, which really speaks to like the depression, the depressive component. And then there's highs, which reflects mania or hypomania. And once again, the risk factors for perinatal bipolar disorder is if you have a personal or family history of bipolar disorder. And some people will experience their first onset of bipolar during the perinatal period. So you could have gone your whole life without having experienced mental health issues in terms of bipolar disorder, and you actually experience it's like brought on or it's brought about during the perinatal period. So that would be the first onset. That's what that means. It's the first time it's come out. And that can happen. And some may experience perinatal psychosis. And it's really important to understand whether you're a mother or a partner or non-birthing parent. This is a medical emergency. This is something that needs immediate attention and treatment, okay? And so what happens in perinatal psychosis is that's when a mother would experience hallucinations. So they could be seeing, hearing, feeling, or tasting things that are not there. In other words, it's visual, auditory, tactile, or olfactory hallucinations. And with psychosis, a person can have bizarre thoughts and behaviors. There can be noticeable cognitive changes. So, if you're a family member or a support person or a friend, and you're starting to see your loved one, the new mom, starting to talk about bizarre things or engage in bizarre behaviors, and there's this shift, it could be a sign of perinatal psychosis. And during this perinatal psychosis, there may also be delusions about infanticide, homicide, and or suicide. And some of the risk factors for perinatal psychosis would include if you have a family or personal history of bipolar disorder, psychosis, sleep deprivation, if you've stopped your meds for bipolar disorder, or if you've had a prior pregnancy loss. These factors put you at greater risk of experiencing a perinatal psychosis. Perinatal anxiety and panic. So that would be experiencing intense fear and or panic attacks. It may mean you have a fear of going out or leaving the house, fear of detachment or that sense of doom, the feeling of going crazy, the fear of dying. You may experience sensations like dizziness, numbness, tingling, shortness of breath, rapid pulse, chest and stomach pains. And so the risk factors for perinatal anxiety or panic would be, once again, if you have a personal or family history of anxiety and panic, if there's been significant life changes or increased stress, if you have a lack of support, if you've had other health issues, if you've had a difficult pregnancy or birth, prior pregnancy loss, or if you're someone who's experienced adverse childhood experiences. All of these are factors that can put you at greater risk of having perinatal anxiety and panic disorder. Then there's perinatal obsessive compulsive disorder, and this is one that I can personally relate to. This is something that I experienced. So, with OCD, with perinatal OCD, you may have repetitive invasive thoughts or images. So it can be very disturbing, and it can be ruminating thoughts, or you might see images or flashes. And then when you have that, you experience a compulsion to check in response to the thoughts or the images. So it's behavior, it's compulsive behavior that you do to kind of check on the thoughts or images that are happening. So that might involve rituals like counting, cleaning, repeating prayers. So in my case, for instance, I was always afraid whenever my husband would leave for the day that he was going to go out and I would see him getting into a car accident. And so every day I would feel a sense of panic and anxiety and fear, intense fear that this was going to be the last time that I'd see my husband. And so I would say to him, like, I love you, as if it was the last time. And I would be terrified all day. And the compulsion would be to call him numerous times throughout the day to make sure that he got to and from work okay and that he was still okay. And so, this can be about baby as well. It could be about loved ones. It could be about yourself. But it's like having these invasive thoughts or images and feeling the need to get reassurance or check in response to these thoughts and images. Some people, it might be, obsessively Googling and doing, Google searches, thinking like seeing a little spot on their baby's arm and then starting to Google rash and then feeling that need to check to make sure that this baby's going to be okay. For others, it could be repeating certain prayers, thinking that if you didn't say X number of prayers per day, that something awful was going to happen, or that image that you had or that thought you had was going to come true. And so the risk factors for this would be if you have a family or personal history of OCD, if you have a history or personal family or personal history of anxiety or panic, depression, or PMDD, which has to do with like your severe period symptoms, preterm delivery, C-section delivery, and prior pregnancy loss also puts you at higher risk of perinatal obsessive compulsive disorder. For others, they may experience perinatal post-traumatic stress disorder, which are distressing anxiety symptoms that are linked to a traumatic experience during the perinatal period. If you're somebody who's already had an underlying diagnosis of PTSD, so from something that's happened, in your childhood or at a different point in your life, it can be exacerbated then by a traumatic birth, bringing about a perinatal post-traumatic stress disorder. And so some of the risk factors would be, if you've had a distressing pregnancy, labor, birth, if you've had an obstetrical emergency, if you've had a loss, a fetal or newborn loss, if you've had medical complications or your newborn has had medical complications and you have a lack of support, if you've had a history of trauma or adverse childhood events, these all put you at greater risk of experiencing perinatal post-traumatic stress disorder. I just want to acknowledge that it can be really scary hearing and learning about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And I would like to say that they're not so common, but in Newfoundland, we have a higher rate than the national average. So 1 in 4 will experience a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. The national average is 1 in 5. So it's really important to recognize the signs and symptoms, to know about them. And if you have any doubt or question, I encourage you to speak with your OBGYN, your family doctor. If your public health nurse is out visiting you and you're starting to question or you have these fears that you might have something more going on, you can speak with them. You can call 811 and you can speak with somebody about your mental health through that line. You can go to the new Mental Health and Addiction Center if you're located in St. John's, or any emergency room across the province if you have concerns about a mental health crisis during the perinatal period, especially if there's potential there for psychosis. There's also doorways right across the province, or in most parts of the province now. And doorways, they have walk-in opportunity to meet in person for one-to-one counseling. They offer sometimes over the phone or virtual same-day appointments. And so if you have any questions around your mental health during that perinatal period, you can touch base with them. The Perinatal Mental Health Alliance, on their website, which we will include in this webinar's notes, or we'll also have a resource package, so you can certainly email Newfoundland groups at nlhealthservices.ca and we can send you an email, a resource package that will include the links to the videos and certain books or articles or resources that was used to pull together this presentation. But the Perinatal Mental Health Alliance has a ton of wonderful resources on their site specific to perinatal mental health. Okay. Prakash Pathways, that is Dr. Archana Vidyasankar. and you can access a referral. You can self-refer through their website to be assessed by a doctor there if you have concerns around your mental health. They also have peer support groups available specific to perinatal mental health. And there's Bridge the Gap, okay? And that will list more resources and have tools available to you to help you cope with any kind of distressing mental health symptom that you have going on. There's lots of cool tips and videos and courses and resources outlined on Bridge the Gap. And so as a province, we are working diligently. There's a task force, and we're trying to improve perinatal mental health in the province. And there's some incredible work happening throughout, and so many people who really care and are passionate about this. And I hope that you found this presentation helpful and have learned something new. Before we clue up, I would like to go over one more strategy on the next slide. When you're feeling confused or alone or unsure, when everything seems really muddled in your mind during the perinatal period, one tool that you could try, one strategy, is reflecting on your personal values. And so what that means is to consider, what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of mom do I want to be, or parent do I want to be? What do I stand for? What's important to me in life? And so I'm going to run through a little mindfulness activity, and I invite you to join along. So I'd like you to sit comfortably in your chair, push your feet into your floor, really feel what it's like to have your feet firmly planted on the floor. Roll your shoulders back. Sit up tall, straighten your spine. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for this part. And I want you to imagine that you're a mother and your child that you raised is now turning 20 years old. You are getting ready to celebrate their 20th birthday. You can hardly believe it. Where did the years go? And your son or daughter, or your child, your now adult child, wants to celebrate, and you're invited. I want you to reflect now. What do you want that relationship to look like? After 20 years together, parenting, how do you imagine this relationship? Are you close? Do you live close by? Do you speak every day or FaceTime every day? Maybe it's once a week. Or is it once a month? Or have you not stayed in contact much? How involved are you in their life? Do they come to you to tell you about their day? Are they excited to share with you all the ups and downs and day-to-day things going on in their life? Do they want you to be involved? Do they still turn to you when they have a difficult decision to make and just want somebody to talk to? They want their parent support. Are you someone they can turn to with a listening ear, non-judgment, and offering some guidance or words of wisdom? Maybe you're somebody who gets together with them, goes to the movies or plays pickleball. Maybe you knit together, have a book club. Or maybe your relationship is strained. Maybe you're not that close or not as close as you had hoped. In this reflection and thinking about this, how do you want to show up for your child? So when it comes to the 20th birthday, when you're there celebrating, what do you hope that relationship looks like? How do you hope that relationship will be? What do you need to do between now and then to become closer to the parent you want to be? So maybe you're in a spot right now where you want to be better. Nobody is perfect. And there's a lot of different factors. Again, you can only control your own behaviors and reactions. You cannot control those of another person. You cannot control your child or the decisions that your child is going to make between now and their 20th birthday. You can have an impact, you can influence, you can support, you can guide, but at the end of the day, they are still their own individual person. So what can you do between now and their 20th birthday that's going to bring you closer to being the parent that you want to be? How do you want to show up? What are the values? What is most important? Is it authenticity? Is it honesty? Is it love? Is it loyalty? Is it fun? Is it friendly? Is it supportive? There's so many different values out there. There's some that value education or performance or achieving wonderful, marvelous things. So maybe as a parent, perhaps that could be important for you to instill that determination and ambition in your child. No matter what it is, This is what I hope that you reflect on. Whenever you go to make a choice, or as you try to navigate this parenting journey, this motherhood journey, and whenever you feel so unsure and unsettled in what to do, just ask yourself, does this choice bring me closer to the person I want to be, the parent I want to be, or does it bring me farther away? And in doing that, hopefully that will help clarify your values.